Rancher found a crying woman in blizzard. Her first words made him drop his gun. The snow came down like judgment. It fell thick and silent over the Montana high country, burying the sagebrush and the stone, the frozen creek beds, and the old wagon ruts that no one traveled anymore. The sky had no color. The land had no shape. There was only white and cold, and the slow erasure of everything a man thought he knew. Jacob Carver rode through it alone. His horse moved beneath him with the tired rhythm of a creature that had long since stopped asking why. The rancher sat low in the saddle, his hat pulled down, his coat buttoned to the throat, but the cold still found him. It always did. Cold had a way of getting inside a man, settling in his bones, in the hollow places where warmth used to live. He had no destination, no plan, no reason to keep riding, except that stopping felt too much like dying. 15 winters had passed since he'd been a different man. 15 winters since he'd ridden out of these mountains with blood on his hands and shame in his heart. He'd built a life after that, a small ranch on the edge of nowhere, a few head of cattle, a roof that didn't leak. He'd told himself it was enough. He'd told himself he'd earned the right to forget. But a man never really forgets. The wind screamed across the open ground, tearing at his coat, his face, his thoughts. Jacob squinted into the storm and saw nothing. He heard nothing but the wind. And then a sound. Faint. Broken. Almost swallowed by the blizzard. He pulled the reins. His horse stopped, ears flicking forward. Jacob sat still, listening. The wind howled. The snow hissed against the frozen earth. And beneath it all, like a thread pulled through cloth, he heard it again. A cry. Human. Female. Desperate. Jacob's hand moved to the rifle strapped to his saddle, not out of threat, but out of instinct. A rancher learned early that the wilderness did not give gifts. It set traps. It tested you. And if you were fool enough to follow a sound into a blizzard, it took you. But he dismounted anyway. The snow came up past his boots. He led the horse forward, slow and careful, scanning the white emptiness. The cry came again, louder now, and he turned toward it. 30 paces ahead, near a cluster of low rocks half buried in drifts, he saw movement. A shape, dark against the snow, huddled, shaking. Jacob moved faster, his breath clouding the air, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. When he reached her, he dropped to one knee. She was a woman, young, maybe 25, maybe younger. Her face was pale, her lips nearly blue, her hair matted with ice. She wore a thin coat that had no business being out here, no gloves, no hat. Her arms were wrapped around something at her chest, clutching it tight. A bundle. Cloth. Moving. Jacob's throat tightened. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes opened. They were dark, storm gray, and when they focused on him, they widened. Not with relief. With recognition. "You," she whispered. Jacob froze. "You came," she said, her voice cracking, tears spilling down her frozen cheeks. "He said you would. He said, Jacob Carver, he said you'd come." The sound of his own name, spoken by a stranger in the middle of a killing storm, hit him like a fist to the chest. Jacob stared at her, his mind racing, his hands still hovering over her shoulders. "I don't know you," he said quietly. "But I know you." Her voice was stronger now, edged with something he couldn't name. Not anger. Not forgiveness. Something in between. "He told me everything. About the mountains. About the claim. About the winter you left him to die." Jacob's blood went cold. "No." She shifted the bundle in her arms, pulling back the edge of the blanket. Inside was a baby, small, red-faced, wailing softly against the wind. The child's eyes opened, and Jacob saw them clearly. Blue. Pale blue. The exact shade his brother's had been. His name was Thomas, the woman said, her voice breaking again. "Thomas Carver. And this is his son." Jacob couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. The world had narrowed to this moment, this woman, this child. The snow fell around them, silent and unforgiving, and somewhere deep in his chest, Something cracked open that he'd spent 15 years trying to keep shut. "Thomas is dead," Jacob said, his voice barely a whisper. "I know," the woman replied. "I was his wife." The words landed like stones in deep water. Jacob looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the truth written in her face. The grief, the exhaustion, the desperate, clinging hope that had carried her through this storm. She had come here for him, not by accident, not by chance. She had come because Thomas had told her to. Jacob's hand moved to his belt, where his revolver sat cold and heavy. Not to draw it, just to touch it, to remind himself he was still real, still here, still breathing. "Why?" he asked. "Why would he send you to me?" The woman's lips trembled. "Because he forgave you," she said softly. "And because he knew you'd never forgive yourself." Jacob Carver had spent 15 winters running from the memory of his brother's face. From a moment he'd ridden away and left Thomas behind in a snowstorm just like this one, too sick to travel, too weak to protest. He'd told himself it was survival, that staying would have killed them both, that Thomas would have understood. But understanding and forgiveness were not the same thing. And now, here in the snow, that forgiveness had found him anyway, delivered by a widow and a crying child who carried his brother's eyes. Jacob stood slowly. He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around the woman's shoulders. Then he lifted the baby from her arms, holding the small, fragile weight against his chest. The child quieted, blinking up at him with those impossible blue eyes. "Can you stand?" Jacob asked. The woman nodded, though her legs shook when he helped her to her feet. He guided her to his horse, lifting her into the saddle, then handed her the baby. She held the child close, her tears freezing on her cheeks. Jacob took the reins and began to walk. The snow fell heavier now, but he knew the way. He'd ridden this country long enough to find his way home even in the dark. Behind him, the woman whispered something he almost didn't hear. "Thank you." Jacob didn't answer. He couldn't. Because he didn't know yet if this was mercy or punishment, if God had sent her to save him, or to make him finally pay for what he'd done. But as the wind howled and the snow buried the world, Jacob Carver kept walking. And for the first time in 15 winters, he wasn't alone. The cabin was small and cold and honest. Jacob built the fire slowly, methodically, the way a man does when his hands need something to do besides shake. He fed the stove with split pine and kindling, watched the flames catch and grow, listened to the crackle and hiss as heat began to push back against the winter dark. The woman sat in the only chair he owned, wrapped in his coat and 2 wool blankets, the baby asleep in her arms. She hadn't spoken since they'd arrived. Neither had he. The storm still raged outside, throwing snow against the windows, rattling the door on its hinges. But inside, the silence was louder. It filled the space between them like something solid, something that had waited 15 years to finally be named. Jacob poured water from a kettle into a tin cup and set it on the table beside her. She looked at it, then at him, and nodded once. Her fingers were still pale from a cold, still trembling as she wrapped them around the cup. "Thank you," she said quietly. Jacob stepped back. He stood near the stove, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the floor. He couldn't look at her. Not directly. Every time he tried, he saw Thomas instead. His younger brother's face, thinner and older than it should have been, hollowed out by sickness and betrayal. "What's your name?" Jacob asked, his voice rough. "Anna," she said. "Anna Carver." The name hit him like a stone. She'd taken Thomas's name. She'd been his wife. And Jacob hadn't even known his brother had married. Hadn't known he'd survived that winter. Hadn't known anything, because he'd never gone back. "How long?" Jacob asked. "How long what?" "How long were you married?" Anna looked down at the baby in her arms. 3 years, she said. "We met in a town called Red Hollow, down in the valley. He was working at a lumber mill. I was a widow already. My first husband died of fever the year before. Thomas, he was kind, gentle. He didn't talk much about his past, but when he did, he talked about you." Jacob's jaw tightened. "What did he say?" Anna's gaze lifted, meeting his for the first time. Her eyes were calm, steady, but there was something beneath the surface, something that knew him better than he wanted to be known. "He said you were the best man he ever knew," she said simply, "and that you'd made the hardest choice a man could make." Jacob turned away. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. He shouldn't have said that. Why not? Because it wasn't true. Wasn't it? The question hung in the air like smoke. Jacob shook his head, unable to answer, unable to look at her. His chest felt tight, his breath shallow. He wanted to walk out into the storm, to saddle his horse and ride until the cold took him. Anything to escape the weight of this moment. But Anna kept talking. "Thomas told me what happened," she said quietly. "About the mining claim you two were working. About the winter that came early. About the sickness that took him and wouldn't let go." Jacob closed his eyes. "He said you stayed as long as you could," Anna continued. "That you gave him your food, your blankets, your horse. That you tried to carry him down the mountain, but he couldn't ride. Couldn't even stand." "I left him," Jacob said, his voice breaking. "I left him there to die." "No," Anna said, and her voice was firm now, steady. "You left him there to live." Jacob turned, staring at her. "What?" Anna shifted the baby in her arms, tucking the blanket tighter around the small, sleeping face. "Thomas told me you begged him to come," she said. "That you argued for 2 days. But he was too weak, too sick, and the snow was coming harder. If you'd stayed, you both would have died. He knew that. So he made you go. I should have stayed anyway. And then I'd have no husband," Anna said softly. "And this child would have no father. And you'd both be bones in the snow." Jacob's throat closed. He wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, that it didn't matter what Thomas had said or thought or forgiven. That guilt didn't work that way. That shame didn't just disappear because someone told you it was all right. But he couldn't speak. Anna looked down at the baby again, her fingers brushing the soft, dark hair on the child's head. "He lived for 3 more years after you left," she said. "A trapper found him a week later and brought him down the mountain. He was sick for a long time, but he healed. He worked. He built a life. He met me. And in the end, he was happy. Then why did he die?" Jacob's voice was barely a whisper. Anna's expression softened, and for the first time, he saw the depth of her grief. "Fever," she said. "It came fast. He was gone in 3 days. But before he went, he made me promise something." Jacob waited. "He made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I'd find you. That I'd tell you he forgave you. That he never blamed you. And that he wanted you to know you gave him those 3 years. You gave him the chance to live." The fire crackled. The wind howled. And Jacob Carver stood in the center of his small, cold cabin, looking at the widow of the brother he'd thought he'd killed, holding the child he'd never known existed, and felt the 15 years of weight begin to shift. Not disappear, not vanish, but shift. Anna stood slowly, carefully, and crossed the room. She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the exhaustion in her face, the strength it had taken to come this far. "He loved you," she said, "until the very end. And he wanted you to know that." Jacob's hands hung at his sides. He didn't know what to do with them. Didn't know what to do with any of this. He looked at the baby, Thomas's son, and saw his brother's face in the shape of the child's nose, the curve of his brow. "What's his name?" Jacob asked hoarsely. "Thomas," Anna said, "after his father." Jacob nodded once, unable to speak. Anna returned to the chair and sat, rocking the baby gently. "I didn't come here to punish you," she said quietly. "I came because I had nowhere else to go. And because Thomas believed you were a good man. I'm hoping he was right." Jacob turned back to the fire. He stared into the flames, watching them dance and flicker, and felt something inside him, something that had been frozen for 15 winters, begin slowly to thaw. He didn't know if he could be the man Thomas believed he was. But for the first time in a long time, he thought he might be willing to try. The days blurred together like snow across glass. Jacob woke before dawn each morning, built the fire, and stepped out into the cold while Anna and the baby still slept. The world outside was white and silent, the kind of silence that felt holy and heavy at the same time. He'd walk to the woodpile, behind the cabin, split logs until his breath came hard and his hands ached, then carry the wood inside and stack it by the stove. He didn't speak much. Neither did she. But the silence between them was different now. It wasn't the sharp, jagged quiet of strangers. It was softer, watchful, like two animals circling the same water, unsure but willing. Anna moved through the cabin with the ease of someone who knew how to make a home out of nothing. She swept the floor, washed the few dishes Jacob owned, folded the blankets with careful, precise hands. She never asked where things were. She simply found them. And when she couldn't find something, she made do. Jacob watched her sometimes when she wasn't looking. The way she hummed while she worked, low wordless tunes that sounded familiar but distant, like something from a dream. The way she held the baby against her shoulder, swaying gently even when the child wasn't fussing. The way she folded cloth in perfect squares, corners aligned, the same way his mother used to fold quilts on Sunday afternoons. It unsettled him, not because it was wrong, but because it was right. She belonged here in a way he never had. One morning, Jacob came inside with an armful of wood and found Anna standing at the stove, heating milk in a small pot. The baby sat propped in a nest of blankets on the floor, watching her with wide, curious eyes. Jacob set the wood down quietly and moved to leave, but Anna spoke without turning. "You don't have to go," she said. Jacob paused, his hand on the door. "Didn't mean to disturb you." "You're not." He stood there, uncertain. Anna poured the milk into a tin cup, tested it with her finger, then knelt beside the baby. She dipped a clean cloth into the milk and let the child suckle on it, patient and steady. The baby's small hands reached up, gripping her wrist. Jacob had never seen anything so fragile and so strong at the same time. "He's too young for a cup," Anna said, her voice soft. "But he's learning. He's stronger than he looks." Jacob nodded, though she wasn't looking at him. He crossed the room and sat at the table, his hands folded in front of him. "What do you need?" he asked. Anna glanced at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" "For the baby. What does he need?" She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Warmth. Food. Time." "I can get food," Jacob said. "There's a town 2 days' ride from here. When the storm breaks, I'll go." "You don't have to." "I know." Anna looked at him, then really looked at him, and Jacob felt the weight of it. She wasn't judging him. She wasn't measuring him against some memory of Thomas. She was simply seeing him as he was, a man trying, in his clumsy, silent way, to do something right. "Thank you," she said quietly. Jacob nodded and stood. He walked back outside, into the cold, and stood there for a long time, letting the wind scrub the heat from his face. The weeks passed slowly. The snow fell and fell, sealing them in. Jacob chopped wood. Anna cooked what little they had, beans, dried meat, flour mixed with water and fried in a pan. The baby grew louder, stronger, more aware. He cried less, smiled more, reached for things with tiny, grasping hands. Jacob learned to hold him. It happened one evening, when Anna's hands were busy with mending a tear in her skirt. The baby had been fussing, squirming in his blankets, and Anna had asked, quietly, almost apologetically, if Jacob would hold him for just a moment. Jacob had frozen, stared at the child like it was a live coal. But Anna had smiled, tired and patient, and said, "He won't break." So Jacob had picked him up, awkward and stiff, holding the baby at arm's length like he might explode. The child had stared up at him with those impossible blue eyes, Thomas's eyes, and Jacob had felt his chest tighten. "Support his head," Anna had said gently, "and bring him closer. He wants to see you." Jacob had done as she said, pulling the baby against his chest. The child's weight was almost nothing, but it felt like the world. Warm, alive, trusting. And then the baby had reached up, tiny fingers curling around Jacob's calloused thumb, and something inside the rancher cracked open. He'd sat down heavily in the chair, still holding the child, and Anna had gone back to her mending. Neither of them spoke. But after a while, Jacob had felt the baby's breathing slow, his body relax, and he realized the child had fallen asleep against him. Anna had glanced over, seen them, and smiled. "He likes you," she'd said softly. Jacob hadn't answered. He just sat there, holding his brother's son, and felt the weight of 15 winters begin to lift, piece by piece. One night, when the fire burned low and the cabin was full of shadows, Anna spoke into the quiet. "You remind me of him." Jacob looked up from where he sat near the stove. "Who?" "Thomas." Jacob's jaw tightened. "I'm nothing like him." "You are," Anna said. She was sitting in the chair, the baby asleep in her lap, her hands folded over the blanket. "You're quieter, more guarded, but you have the same hands, the same way of moving, like you're always carrying something heavy." Jacob looked down at his hands. Scarred, rough. The hands of a man who'd spent his life working and running and trying to forget. "Thomas carried it too," Anna said. "The weight of things. He just learned to set it down sometimes." "How?" Anna's gaze softened. "He let people help him." Jacob didn't respond. He poked at the fire with a stick, watched the embers flare and die. Outside, the wind moaned through the eaves, restless and cold. "I don't know how to do that," Jacob said finally. "I think you're learning." He looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't look away. Anna met his gaze, steady and calm, and Jacob realized something he hadn't let himself think before. She wasn't here by accident. She wasn't just a widow looking for shelter. She was here because Thomas had sent her. Because his brother, even in death, had believed Jacob could be more than the man who'd left him behind. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe it too. The snow kept falling. The days kept passing. And slowly, in the small, quiet acts of living, carrying wood, warming milk, watching the baby sleep, Jacob Carver began to build something he thought was lost forever. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the willingness to try. And in the stillness of a cabin, as the fire burned low and the child breathed softly in Anna's arms, Jacob wondered if maybe, just maybe, that was enough. For now. The thaw came slowly, like forgiveness. First, the drip of water from the cabin roof. Then the soft collapse of snow sliding off the pines. The creek behind the ranch began to murmur again, its voice hesitant at first, then stronger, rushing over stones that hadn't seen sunlight in months. The world turned from white to gray to brown, and then, finally, to green. Jacob stood on the porch in the early morning light, watching the land wake up. Spring had always been his least favorite season. It brought too much hope, too many promises. And Jacob had learned long ago not to trust promises. But this year, something was different. This year, the cabin behind him wasn't empty. This year, there were sounds inside, the soft coo of a baby, the quiet hum of a woman moving through the rooms, the crackle of a fire that someone else had built. This year, he wasn't alone, but he knew it wouldn't last. Anna had begun to pack 3 days ago. Not all at once. Not with any announcement. Just small things, folding the blankets more carefully, setting her few belongings in a neat stack by the door, checking the baby's clothes to see what needed mending before they traveled. She was preparing to leave. Jacob hadn't asked where she planned to go. Hadn't asked if she had family or friends or any place in the world that wanted her. He'd simply watched her move through the cabin with that quiet, steady grace, and felt something inside him begin to break all over again. He'd gotten used to her, to them, to the sound of the baby crying in the night, to the smell of bread baking in the morning, to the way Anna hummed while she worked. He'd gotten used to not being alone, and now she was leaving. Jacob turned and walked back inside. Anna was at the table, mending a small shirt for the baby. The child sat on a blanket near the stove, chewing on a wooden spoon Jacob had carved for him. When Jacob entered, the baby looked up and smiled, a wide, toothless grin that hit Jacob square in the chest. "Morning," Anna said without looking up. "Morning," Jacob replied. He poured himself coffee from the pot on the stove, then stood there, uncertain. Finally, he spoke. "You don't have to go." Anna's hand stilled. She looked up at him, her expression calm but unreadable. "Yes, I do." "Why?" "Because this isn't my home, Jacob. It's yours." Jacob set the cup down, his jaw tight. You've been here 3 months. You made it home. Anna's eyes softened. And I'm grateful for that. Truly. You gave us shelter when we had none. You kept us alive. But the snow's melted now. The roads are clear. And I can't stay here forever, living off your kindness. It's not kindness, Jacob said, his voice rougher than he meant. He stopped, searching for the word. It's what Thomas would have wanted. Anna smiled, sad and small. Maybe. But Thomas isn't here. And I can't stay just because of what he would have wanted. I have to think about what's right. For me. For the baby. Jacob looked at the child. His nephew. Though he'd never said the word aloud. The boy was sitting up now, steady and strong, reaching for things with determined little hands. He had Thomas's eyes, but when he smiled, Jacob saw something else. Something that reminded him of their mother, of the way she used to look at them when they were small and the world was still kind. Where will you go? Jacob asked quietly. Anna folded the shirt in her lap, her fingers tracing the seams. There's a town about 50 miles south. Red Hollow. We lived there before Thomas died. I know some people. A woman who runs a boarding house. She said I could work for her if I ever needed to. Cooking, cleaning. She'd let me keep the baby with me. Jacob nodded slowly. It was a good plan. Practical. The kind of plan a widow with no money and no family had to make. But the thought of her leaving, of the cabin going silent again, felt like something being torn out of him. What if you stayed? Jacob said suddenly. Anna looked up, startled. Jacob, not as a guest, he said quickly. Not as someone passing through, but as someone who belongs here. Anna's breath caught. What are you saying? Jacob crossed the room and sat down across from her. His hands were folded on the table, rough and scarred, and he stared at them like they might have the answer he was looking for. I'm saying I want you to stay, he said. You and the boy. I'm saying this cabin's big enough for 3. That the ranch could use the help. He stopped, swallowed hard. That I don't want to be alone anymore. Anna's eyes filled with tears. Jacob, you don't owe me anything. I know. And you don't have to do this because of Thomas. I'm not. Jacob looked up, meeting her gaze. I'm doing this because I want to. Because these last 3 months, they've been the first time in 15 years I didn't feel like a ghost. And I know I'm not much. I know I'm not the kind of man who deserves a second chance. But if you'll let me, I'd like to try. I'd like to give that boy a home. And I'd like to give you one too. Anna's hands trembled. She looked down at the baby, then back at Jacob. What are you asking me? Jacob took a breath. I'm asking you to marry me. The words hung in the air like smoke. Anna's tears spilled over, running down her cheeks. She covered her mouth with one hand, shaking her head, not in refusal, but in disbelief. You don't have to answer now, Jacob said quickly. You can think about it. You can, Jacob, Anna whispered. I need to do something first. She stood, wiping her eyes, and walked to the door. Jacob followed, confused. Anna picked up a shawl, wrapped it around her shoulders, and stepped outside. Jacob hesitated, then followed her. She walked across the muddy yard, past the woodpile, past the barn, to a place Jacob rarely went. A small rise at the edge of the property, overlooking the valley. And there, beneath a young pine tree, was a grave. Jacob had dug it 2 weeks after Anna arrived. He'd carved Thomas's initials into a flat piece of wood and driven it into the ground. He hadn't asked Anna if she wanted it. He'd just done it. Because it felt like something that needed to exist. A place to remember. A place to say the things that couldn't be said before. Anna knelt in the mud, her hands resting on the marker. She was crying, her shoulders shaking, and Jacob stood a few feet back, unsure if he should stay or go. I loved him, Anna said, her voice breaking. I loved him so much, and I miss him every day. Jacob's throat closed. But I can't keep holding on to him, Anna continued. I can't keep carrying him with me everywhere I go. Because he's gone. And I'm still here. And so is his son. And we deserve to live. Not just survive. Live. She looked back at Jacob, her face wet with tears. Do you understand? Jacob nodded, unable to speak. Anna reached out her hand. Jacob stared at it for a long moment. Then he stepped forward and took it. Her fingers were cold and small and strong, and when she stood, she didn't let go. They walked back to the cabin together, side by side, and when they reached the door, Anna stopped. She turned to face him, her eyes red but clear. "Yes," she said quietly. Jacob blinked. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you." Anna smiled through her tears. "Not because I owe you. Not because of Thomas. But because I think maybe you're right. Maybe we both deserve a second chance." Jacob felt something inside him break open, something that had been locked away for so long he'd forgotten it was there. Relief. Hope. The terrifying, fragile possibility of happiness. He reached out and cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear. "I'll do right by you," he said hoarsely. "By both of you. I swear it." "I know," Anna whispered. Inside the cabin, the baby began to cry, a soft, hungry sound. Anna laughed, pulling away to go to him, and Jacob followed her inside. The fire was still burning. The coffee was still warm. And for the first time in 15 years, Jacob Carver allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could be the man his brother always thought he was. Redemption wasn't earned in a single moment. It was built in 1,000 small ones. And sometimes it arrived in a blizzard, crying.